one of the themes that runs through your channel is a pro-life message. What is your faith journey in all of this? Did you grow up in a Christian home? Is that kind of your background? Like, just talk a little bit about that first.
Yeah, that was so me growing up very much was in the church, very active in the church. And like mentioned earlier, probably foreshadowing this some, I'm naturally very skeptical of many things. And so I'm here in Alabama. I grew up in like a Church of Christ, and it's very gospel, you know, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's very direct, and that's the kind of preaching that you're getting in the church that I grew up in. And so, in some ways, the messaging for me, like some of the questions I had, or some of my concerns, like the way it was being preached to me didn't like it wasn't it didn't meld well with the way that I thought. So I found myself like, as much as I participated when I was young, separated from it. And it took me some time to kind of even get back connected with religion and even religious thought at all, because my exposure to it was that of the church that I grew up in. And so, honestly, just reading like some stuff like Maps of Meaning, watching different lectures on YouTube led me to interacting with Christianity and religious thought in general in a different way. It wasn't the way that it almost felt like it was presented to me when I was a kid as this like almost like state of fact. It was more so like, here's these rich stories that I can learn from, and here's all these valuable lessons that I can derive from these stories. Because it's there's no way for me to ignore that, like, my Christian faith has played a part in how I think and in how I move, because it was a part of how I was raised.
Mm.
And that's part of what scares me today, is I think a lot of people are very willing to dispense the with Christianity and neglect some of the goods that it's provided and some of the things that it's led to us today. And that was like my place where I hit, that I really had to contend with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I know for me, I walked away from a lot of stuff, and not directly, just apathy, college, jobs, life, kids, that kind of stuff. Um, and whenever my wife and I, we were together, we had kids, and God kind of like put a divine situation in front of us that kind of challenged us about uh, going back to a church. And we ultimately did. We would only go to one a week. We wouldn't go to the three. And then my wife said something very profound. She said, "I realize I'm blaming God for things that the church did to me." And I was like, "Yep." And then it was like little by little. And I know people always look at the end product. They go, "Oh, you're a Bible thumper, or you're a Christian." You're what? I'm like, well, you got to understand too. There's this journey. That first 6 months, it was almost like an everyday mental battle
Yes.
of questions, things. And like you, again, I didn't really have opportunities during that time to really do a lot of internet stuff, but it was a lot of like, I'm going to read this book. I say like he was like an associate pastor. He basically gave me all these books. Read this one. I think it'll help you. I know you're a science guy, so you're going to have these kinds of questions. Here's this book. Here's some videos. Listen, if you don't want them or whatever, there's no harm, no foul. You give them back to me. You whatever, no big deal. Just get to them. And some things you get to, some things you don't. I think it's like you're constantly chipping away different questions and rabbit holes and different things. And um, is there like a certain question that you like one like faith based one, like I had to get over this one? Like for me, there was things like I always love the fact that there's no proof of God, but it's almost as though science has explained everything. And I found this list that Stephen Meyer had done in an interview where he talked about like, and the one that always stuck with me was human consciousness. What's the formula for emotions? Like there's these certain things that exist that if you purely believe in just evolution, you purely believe in just this, we don't really have a way of explaining all that. And not only that, you have something that is so innate in a human that can be in a third world country, in the richest population in America. It can be in 13th century. It can be in 21st century. And there's something that's the same. How
Yeah.
can that be? How can that be? And I was like, whoa, that popped my bubble a minute. Not saying that made me really. I'm not even trying to say science can't understand all that better or understand it at all, but at least it made me go, okay, wait a minute. There's right. There is some things here that are very profound that I haven't spent time really trying to give God a fair chance. Like I hadn't given him a fair chance, that I just hadn't thought about it. Do you have
Right.
one of those things or a story like you could share where it kind of like, yeah, this was a big hurdle for me, or this is one in particular that I can put my finger on?
I think that for me, there weren't as many like specific things. Like there wasn't very many. Well, when I read this story, this came up, or when I read that story, that came up, or things like that. Because nothing steered me away from being an atheist faster than reading atheist. Like there were so
Yes.
many holes in their thinking, and there was a lot of presuppositions that they just have that I think purely just came from religious thought that they couldn't explain. Like when I maybe hear them talk about free will or things of that nature, like those are the sort of things that made me say, okay, I'm not an atheist, because that's most people's path. I think if they stray from Christianity or any religion, is they start thinking, oh, maybe I'm an atheist. But for me, when I started reading and watching some of their stuff, there were big gaps there. And so I think the main thing for me was never any particular questions outside of, at the highest level, what purpose do I think, what purpose do I believe religion serves in my life or in people's lives? And we can say specifically here, since like the context of where I grew up, and the major religion here is Christianity, because that's what I grew up in. So I could look at it and say, what purpose does Christianity serve in my life? And it basically led me to the point where I look at it and say, I think that, and I've talked about this in a video before a little bit, but I think there's many kinds of truth. And I ended up, for me, putting Christianity into this category of functional truth that, and we may differ on this, and I think that's fine. But I view religion as incredibly valuable stories and incredibly valuable lessons that tell us something about human nature and human condition and how things ought to be, that science could never answer.
Mhm.
But then I also see like science and um, other realities as like factual truth, so they can just tell us what is. I don't think science can never tell us what ought to be. To me, there's no secular argument for why someone shouldn't kill someone else.
Right.
Like that,
Right.
all those have to lean on like moral arguments, or arguments that, even if people make that argument, say that it's not based in religion, it is, because it's based off of some beliefs or presuppositions that come from Christianity. And so for me, that's the major thing. There wasn't particular issues outside of, what is this being put forth? Is this putting forth what
Mhm.
is, or is this putting forth what ought to be? And so that was the thing in my head, where I moved from thinking that the Bible and the teachings were telling me what is, and they were telling me what ought to be.
Yeah, that's good. That's real good. The one thing I think is, I know I've heard, so like the basically like an anti-aggression principle, or just a nonviolent principle from an atheist. It's always like, but yeah, but you're being authoritarian because you're setting that standard.
Right.
But another human being can just say, well, that's not my standard. Like
Exactly.
well, you don't have a right to judge me. Like I don't care that I don't care that you're telling me I can't do something, because there's nothing bigger than both of us to make us both accountable. And again, and I'm an increasingly hardcore libertarian again slash anarchist of like, can everyone just do? I had said this in a video. I don't even know if I posted the whole video now that I think about it. But anyway, it was like the Texas versus California mindset of
Mm,
like, Texas doesn't really care what California does, But California is obsessed with what Texas does.
Yes.
And I'm increasingly like in this camp where I'm like, I really don't care what you do. But you are like obsessed with what I do. Like, you guys cannot stand that I'm a Christian. You guys cannot stand. I didn't do anything to you, and it's just like, wow.
Yes.
And I think that's what you're saying, is that there's this like, there's a book. I was going to try to look it up, but I didn't want to Google and type while you're talking. Frank Turek did one called "Stealing from God," and there was like an acronym or whatever, and it's the same kind of thing. It's like, yeah, you're arbitrarily deciding what morality is. You're just making, and it's not to say that you can't do that. No one's saying you can't do that. Like Sam Harris is notorious for this. Like, yeah, it's okay. You can absolutely say that's the right thing to do, and we all can live into that bucket, and we can agree. But that has nothing to do with a faction of humanity that will not agree with you.
Yes.
You have no real authority to tell them that they can't live that way, other than you don't. And then what are you going to do? Go to war with them? Because
exactly.
At that point, they're just declaring conflict with your structure. And I think that's what we see kind of play out in the Bible and other things in history. Like, well, that's what happens, basically. So that takes you to your knee, and you have this rich foundation of your faith, and you have the thoughts and whatever. But man, oh man, bro, you go into some pro-life topics. Wow. I mean, I am increasingly pro-life. Like, I've never not been, but it was also one of those, I grew up more in the, yeah, but they can do what they want to do. And then it become more like the mantra was safe, legal, and rare. That was the mantra that took off for so long. And there was no real authority here, even in the church, as far as I know. Again, I didn't hear it, that said, well, if it's safe, then why is it rare?
Right.
Like, why are you putting constraints on something? Like, who are you to decide? Like, there's no, and then it was like, well, when it's 6 months, well, all right, so 5 months and 30 days is okay. And then it was like, well, when it has it's always like this moving barometer of change. And then something happened. And again, as my faith grew, I was reading different books, I was learning more. And as a scientist, I'm also watching technology change, right? I'm watching NICU babies born earlier and earlier, saved earlier and earlier. I mean, I've been in the NICU when there's crack babies there. I've seen stuff that I would never think this could be a normal human. And science has been blessed with some miraculous brains to learn how to make things save lives. Like, that's what we do in this country, especially. But then a switch flipped somewhere around 2015, 16. It kind of coincides with Trump getting elected, where the abortion movement become a pro-abortion movement. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. I thought it was about choice. I thought it was safe, legal, and rare. And it become, no, anything goes. You don't have a right to tell them they can do anything. And everyone is obsessed with what every state does. We can't have 50 different rules. We have to have this one authoritarian, anything goes thing. What is your thought on that? Because, obviously you were younger in college. I don't know about you, but I really didn't care about these kinds of things when I was in college. I mean, I kind of had some of the philosophy. You're learning different things. You're being challenged. I wasn't like you. I wasn't reading what you were reading in middle school. I wasn't reading Thomas Sowell. So you're way ahead of me in the curve, brother. More proud of you. But